What if someone told you, centuries ago, that a time would come when food would disappear from the earth? Not because of drought, not because of war, but because humanity itself would lose its way. Would you believe them? Would you laugh? Or would you sit down, get quiet, and actually listen? Because here is the thing. Some people said exactly that. Prophets, seers, mystics, ancient philosophers. They looked into the future and saw something alarming. They saw empty tables. They saw starving children. They saw a world that had everything it needed to feed itself, and yet chose not to. And now, standing here in the 21st century, surrounded by food deserts and supply chain collapses, and a billion people going to bed hungry every single night, you have to ask yourself one very uncomfortable question. Were they right? Today, we are going to go deep. We are going to talk about prophecy, about history, about the strange and disturbing connections between ancient warnings and modern reality. We are going to talk about what a great famine actually means, not just physically but spiritually and philosophically. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you will never look at a grocery store shelf the same way again. Stay with me. This is going to change something inside you. Let us start at the very beginning. Not the beginning of recorded history, but the beginning of the idea. The idea that one day, the world will face a hunger so vast, so complete, so total, that it will shake civilization to its foundation. Almost every major religious and philosophical tradition on Earth carries some version of this warning. The ancient Egyptians had it. The Babylonians had it. The Hebrews had it. The early Christians had it. The Hindus had it in their concept of the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, when Dharma collapses and the earth stops giving its fruits. The Norse had Fimbulwinter, 3 years of endless cold and starvation before the final battle of the gods. Even the Maya, on the other side of the world, encoded warnings about cosmic cycles that would bring destruction and scarcity to humanity. This is not a coincidence. When that many different cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, arrive at the same dark vision, something deeper is speaking. Something underneath history. Something underneath religion. Some kind of pattern that human consciousness has been picking up on, over and over again, like a signal that keeps breaking through the noise. So what were they seeing? The most famous prophetic warning about famine probably comes from the Bible. In the book of Genesis, the Pharaoh of Egypt has a dream. He sees 7 fat cows come out of the Nile, and then 7 thin cows eat the fat ones. He sees 7 full ears of grain, and then 7 withered ears swallow them up. He wakes up disturbed. He does not understand, and no one in his court can explain it. Then they bring in Joseph, and Joseph looks at the dream and says, "These are not just images. These are a message. 7 years of abundance are coming to Egypt, and after them, 7 years of famine so severe that all the abundance will be forgotten. The famine will consume the land." And Joseph was right. He was so right that Pharaoh made him the second most powerful man in Egypt, gave him authority to prepare the entire nation for what was coming. Joseph spent 7 years storing grain, building reserves, and planning for the collapse. And when the famine hit, Egypt survived. The surrounding nations did not. People came from all over the ancient world, begging for food. And Egypt had it, because someone listened to the prophecy, because someone took it seriously instead of dismissing it. Now here is where it gets philosophically interesting. Was Joseph a prophet? Was he a gifted interpreter of dreams? Or was he simply a man who understood something fundamental about cycles? About the way nature moves in waves of plenty and scarcity? About the way human systems always expand beyond their ability to sustain themselves? Maybe it does not matter which explanation you choose, because the outcome is the same. Preparation saved a civilization. Ignoring the warning would have destroyed it. And this is the central philosophical question that runs through every single prophecy about famine throughout human history. Not whether the famine will come, but whether we will listen. Let us move forward in time to the prophet Joel in the Hebrew Bible. Joel does not speak about a famine of bread. He speaks about a famine of something deeper. He describes armies of locusts devouring everything in their path. The vine is dried up, and the fig tree languisheth. The pomegranate tree, the palm tree, and the apple tree, even all the trees of the field, are withered. Joel is watching his agricultural world collapse in real time, and he is interpreting it as a spiritual signal, a warning that something much larger is coming, that the locust army is just a preview, that if the people do not change, if they do not return to something essential, the destruction will become total. What strikes me about Joel is not the imagery. It is the diagnosis. He does not say the famine is coming because the rain stopped or because the climate shifted. He says it is coming because something inside the society is rotted, because the people have become disconnected from what matters, because they have traded wisdom for comfort and depth for distraction. Sound familiar? Now, let us talk about something that most people do not know. In the Islamic prophetic tradition, there are numerous hadith, recorded sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, that describe signs of the end of times. And among those signs, prominently, is the return of widespread famine. But what is fascinating is the context in which famine appears in these prophecies. It does not appear alone. It appears alongside moral collapse, alongside the disappearance of honesty, alongside the spread of a kind of spiritual poverty that manifests as physical poverty. The Prophet Muhammad described a time when knowledge would be lifted from the earth, and scholars have debated for centuries what that means. Does it mean that books will be burned? Will those universities close? Or does it mean something subtler and more terrifying? That knowledge will exist everywhere, and yet people will understand nothing. That information will flood the world, but wisdom will starve. A famine of wisdom, in a world drowning in data. Is that not exactly where we are? Let us move out of the religious dimension and into the philosophical one. Because prophecy, at its deepest level, is not about supernatural foresight. It is about pattern recognition carried to its ultimate conclusion. The greatest prophets throughout history were not magicians. They were careful observers of reality who dared to follow the logic of what they saw all the way to its end, without flinching, without stopping at the comfortable place, without saying, surely it will not get that bad. The ancient Greek philosophers had a concept called nemesis. Not revenge, exactly. Something more like the inevitable consequence of hubris, of overreach, of a system that grows so far beyond the natural boundaries that it collapses under its own weight. The 18th century philosopher Malthus tried to formalize this. He looked at population growth and food production, and he did the math, and he said, at some point, these lines cross. At some point, the number of mouths exceeds the amount of food. And when that happens, nature corrects. Brutally. Through famine, disease, and war. People have been arguing with Malthus for 200 years. And they have not been entirely wrong to argue with him. Technology has repeatedly defied his predictions. The Green Revolution of the 20th century multiplied agricultural yields in ways that Malthus could never have imagined. New technologies, new farming methods, new seeds, new fertilizers, they push the catastrophe back. Maybe indefinitely, the optimists say. Maybe not, the pessimists whisper. But here is what even the optimists cannot argue with. Right now, today, in the 21st century, with all of our technology, with all of our surplus, with enough food produced globally to feed every person on Earth, over 800 million people are chronically hungry. Over 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. Children in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in sub-Saharan Africa are dying of starvation right now, while somewhere else, 1,000 miles away, tons of food are being thrown away. Restaurants dumping leftovers. Grocery stores are discarding perfectly edible produce. Households waste a third of everything they buy. The famine is already here. It is just unevenly distributed. And this is perhaps the most prophetic thing of all. The ancient seers saw a great famine coming. They may have been describing exactly this. Not a Hollywood apocalypse where everyone starves at once, but a slow, grinding, structural famine. A famine that exists in the middle of abundance. A famine that is not about the absence of food, but about the absence of justice. About the failure to share. About the triumph of greed over compassion. Seneca, the great Roman philosopher, wrote something that has always haunted me. He said that the wise man asks not whether the crops will grow, but whether the hearts of men are fertile. Because a field can be full and a civilization can still starve. It can starve of meaning. It can starve of truth. It can starve of connection to something larger than itself. We are going to pause here for a moment, because I want you to really sit with that idea. A civilization can starve in the middle of plenty. How? How does that happen? It happens when the distribution systems break down. Not just the physical ones, the trucks and trains and supply chains, but the moral ones. The systems of trust and fairness and shared obligation that hold a society together. When those systems fail, food stops moving from where it is to where it is needed. And it is not a technical problem. It is a spiritual one. The prophet Amos in the Hebrew Bible was furious about this. He was not living through a famine in the physical sense. The land was actually producing well, but he could see that the surplus was being hoarded. The wealthy were building bigger houses, and the poor were being crushed. He used imagery that was unmistakably about food. He spoke of the merchants who could not wait for the Sabbath to be over so they could get back to cheating customers on the weight of grain. He talked about people who sold the poor for a pair of sandals. And he said, "A day is coming when I will send a famine on the land. Not a famine of bread or water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. People will wander from sea to sea seeking something to fill the emptiness, and they will not find it." Amos understood something centuries ahead of modern sociology. That hunger is not just physical, that the deepest famines are famines of meaning. And that physical famine often follows spiritual famine the way a shadow follows a body. First, you lose the inner nourishment. Then the outer world reflects that loss to you. Now let us look at this from another angle entirely. The prophetic angle of nature itself. Indigenous cultures around the world have maintained for thousands of years that the earth is not a machine. It is a living system. And living systems have limits. And living systems respond to how they are treated. The Native American concept of reciprocity, of taking only what you need, of giving back to the land, of speaking to the soil and the seeds and the rain as relatives, not as resources. This was not just spirituality. It was agriculture. It was a practical philosophy of sustainable relationships with the food systems that sustained life. And what happened when European colonization destroyed those philosophies and replaced them with extraction? The buffalo were hunted to near extinction in a generation. The topsoil of the American Great Plains was stripped away in decades, producing the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, one of the great agricultural catastrophes in American history. Millions fled their homes. A civilization that had been built on the idea that nature was infinite and humans could take without consequence got its first brutal lesson. But did it learn? Did the prophetic warning stick? The next warning is coming in the form of climate change, and it is the single greatest threat to global food security in human history. We are watching it in real time. Droughts where there was always rain, floods where there was always dry land, seasons shifting, pollinator populations are collapsing. Ocean acidification is threatening the fish stocks that feed 1 billion people. The glaciers that feed the rivers that water the crops of South Asia are melting. The aquifers of the American Midwest are being drawn down faster than they can be replenished. The soil microbiome that makes agriculture possible, the invisible civilization of bacteria and fungi that lives beneath our feet and makes plant life possible, is being destroyed by industrial farming methods at a rate that scientists describe as nothing short of catastrophic. This is the great famine the prophets saw, not fire from the sky, not a single dramatic apocalyptic moment, but a slow, systemic unraveling, the death of 1,000 cuts, a world that keeps producing enough food to feed itself until one day, suddenly, it does not. And the terrifying thing about collapse is that it rarely looks dramatic from the inside. Right up until the point of failure, most systems look like they are functioning. The Roman Empire was still holding games in the Colosseum while the provinces fell. I want to tell you about a man who spent his life trying to sound this alarm in the modern era. His name was William Voigt, and in 1948, he wrote a book called Road to Survival. He was looking at population growth, soil depletion, and the destruction of natural systems, and he said, "This is a path to mass starvation." He was largely ignored. People were too busy celebrating the end of World War II, too full of optimism about technology and progress, to want to hear about limits. His book was a prophecy dismissed. Then, in 1968, Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb and made similar predictions. He was criticized for being too alarmist, and some of his specific predictions did not come true on the timelines he imagined. Technology intervened again. The Green Revolution intervened again. But here is the philosophical point. The fact that a catastrophe was delayed does not mean it was prevented. It might just mean it was deferred. The debt was added to the balance sheet to be paid later, with interest. And what is later exactly? How much time have we bought? And at what cost? The Green Revolution that saved 1 billion lives was built on petroleum-based fertilizers and pesticides that are themselves finite resources, that have poisoned watersheds and destroyed soil health, and created agricultural systems so fragile and dependent on external inputs that a single disruption in the supply chain can collapse them. We traded resilience for productivity. We traded depth for scale. And now the bill is coming due. This is what philosophy does that prophecy cannot always do alone. Philosophy makes the argument. It shows you the logic chain, link by link. It does not ask you to believe on faith. It asks you to follow the reasoning wherever it leads. And when you follow the reasoning about food systems, about soil health, about climate change, about wealth inequality and distribution, about the spiritual poverty of a civilization that has everything and appreciates nothing, when you follow all of that reasoning to its honest conclusion, you do not need a prophet. You need only to think clearly. But prophecy does something that pure philosophy cannot do either. It speaks to something in you that logic alone cannot reach. It speaks to your gut, to your soul, to the place in you that already knows something is wrong, that has always been known. The place in you that feels the wrongness when you walk past a homeless person eating from a garbage can in a city where every restaurant throws away 100 pounds of food every night. The place in you that feels the wrongness when you hear about children dying of malnutrition in countries that export food to wealthier nations. That feeling of wrongness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the prophet inside you speaking. And what does that prophet say? It says what every prophet throughout human history has said. This does not have to happen. This is a choice. Everything about the trajectory of human civilization is a series of choices, and choices can be changed. Not easily, not without pain, but they can be changed. The philosopher Plato wrote in the Republic about a city that had become diseased. Not physically, morally. A city that had grown so large, so complex, so focused on luxury and expansion, that it had lost its original purpose. And Plato said that a city without wisdom at its center will always tend toward injustice. And a city that trends toward injustice will eventually destroy itself. From the inside. Not because of enemies, but because of the rot at its core. Look at the food systems of the modern world, and you see exactly what Plato described. A system that began with the purpose of feeding people. That has become an industry. That has become a financial asset class, where hedge funds now own farmland. Commodity traders in Chicago set prices that determine whether children in Mali eat or starve, where the primary driver of agricultural decision-making is not nutrition but profit, where a corporation can patent a seed, can own the intellectual property of a food plant that grew for 10,000 years in the commons, where farmers in India, trapped in debt to chemical companies for the very seeds they plant, kill themselves in numbers so vast that the phenomenon has a name. The farmer suicides of India. Over 300,000 since 1995. Each one a prophecy fulfilled. Each one is a warning that the system is breaking. The famine is already here, just wearing different clothes. This is the Great Famine. This is what the prophets saw. Not a single apocalyptic moment, but this. The slow erosion of everything that sustains life. The conversion of soil to commodity. The conversion of water to assets. The conversion of seeds to intellectual property. The conversion of hunger from a tragedy to a market. And yet, there is another thread running through all of these prophecies. A thread that gets less attention but matters just as much. Every prophet who warned about famine also spoke about renewal, about the possibility of reversal, about the human capacity to wake up before it is too late. Even the most severe prophetic warnings in history contain a conditional, a door left open. Joseph did not just predict the famine. He planned for it. He built the infrastructure of survival. He took the prophecy and turned it into action. That is the full prophetic response. Not just seeing the darkness coming, but lighting a lamp. The Sufi mystic Rumi wrote, in the 13th century, in a world recovering from the devastation of Mongol invasions and widespread famine, he wrote about a hunger that becomes a teacher, about the empty stomach as a doorway, about how scarcity, when met with consciousness, can awaken something in a human being that abundance puts to sleep. Not because suffering is good, but because suffering, when it is not met with blame or denial, when it is met with presence and honesty, can crack something open, can clear away the noise, can make visible what matters. What matters? That is the philosophical question underneath all of this. What matters when the shelves are empty? What matters when the system breaks down? What remains? Community remains. Human connection remains. The knowledge of how to grow things remains, or it can be recovered. The wisdom of indigenous agricultural traditions remains in the memories of people who never entirely abandoned them. The soil itself remains, damaged but recoverable, given time and care, and a different relationship. There are people all over the world right now who are not waiting for the prophecy to be fully fulfilled before they begin building something different. Urban farmers, permaculture designers, seed savers, soil scientists have devoted their careers to understanding the living world beneath their feet and how to restore it. Food sovereignty activists who are fighting the legal battles over who owns the right to grow food and how. Small farmers who are choosing to grow for health rather than yield. Communities that are rebuilding local food systems, shortening the supply chains, getting to know the people who grow their food, bringing the sacred back into the act of eating. These people are also prophets. They are also reading the signs and following them to their honest conclusion. And their conclusion is not despair. Their conclusion is work. Deep, patient, sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce work. The work of rebuilding the conditions for life. The philosopher Albert Camus said that the only honest response to an absurd and broken world is not escape and not despair, but engagement. The willingness to look at what is true and then to act as if acting matters, even without certainty that it will succeed. Because the alternative, the withdrawal, the cynicism, the comfortable numbness, that is its own kind of famine. That is the famine of hope. And that famine is the most dangerous of all. So where does this leave us? You have come this far into this video. Something brought you here. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the title caught something in you. Maybe you have been feeling something in your gut about the state of the world, and you wanted to sit with it, to think through it, to have it named. Here is what I believe. I believe the prophets were right. I believe there is a great famine coming, and in many ways it is already here. I believe it is not just about food, although it is absolutely about food. I believe it is about the impoverishment of everything that sustains life, including meaning, including connection, including the humility to live within limits, including the wisdom to know what enough means. I believe we are living through a prophetic moment, one of those rare and terrifying hinges in history when the future is not yet written, and the choices we make now will echo for centuries. And I believe that the ancient prophets, whoever they were, whatever tradition they came from, were not trying to frighten us into paralysis. They were trying to wake us up. They were trying to shake us out of the comfortable sleep of normalcy into a different quality of awareness. An awareness that knows what is at stake. An awareness that takes seriously the fragility of the systems that sustain life. An awareness that understands that convenience is not the same as security. That growth is not the same as flourishing. That having more is not the same as living well. The great famine in the prophecies is a crisis of relationship. Our relationship with the earth. Our relationship with each other. Our relationship with the truth. Our relationship with the future. Every time we choose extraction over care, every time we choose comfort over honesty, every time we choose short-term gain over long-term wisdom, we are moving toward that prophesied darkness. And every time we choose differently, every time we slow down enough to actually see what is happening around us and in us, and to act from that seeing with courage and love, we are building the alternative. We are becoming, each in our small way, the Joseph who stored grain against the coming shortage. The Amos who named the injustice out loud. The Rumi who found in hunger not a curse, but a teacher. The prophecy is a mirror. It is showing us ourselves. And what we do with that reflection, that is the only thing that has ever mattered. You are still here. You watched this whole video. That means something. That means you are not asleep. That means somewhere inside you, you feel the weight of these questions. Do not let that feeling pass. Do not close the tab and scroll to something easier and forget. Let it sit. Let it do its work. Ask yourself tonight what kind of relationship you have with food, with soil, with the future, with the people around you who are hungry in ways that have nothing to do with calories. Ask yourself what it would mean to take the prophecy seriously. Not to panic, but to genuinely, quietly, courageously wake up. Because the prophets are still speaking. And the question they are asking is always the same. Are you listening? If this video made you think, made you feel something, made something shift inside you even slightly, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Tell me what resonates with you. Tell me where you disagree. Tell me which prophecy or which idea hit you hardest. Because of the conversation about these matters. Your voice in it matters. You are not just a viewer. You are part of the story. And if you believe that these questions deserve more attention, that philosophy and prophecy and the state of the world are worth serious thought and serious conversation, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. There is so much more to explore together. The world needs more people who are willing to look at hard things with open eyes and open hearts. And if you are here, that is already who you are. Do not waste it. See you in the next video.